the appropriate
Okay.
time.
All right. Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Members to join you virtually, so I'll keep you updated as people check in. Chair, the meeting is now live.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to this morning's first hybrid meeting of the Planning Committee of Bolsover District Council since the beginning of lockdown, actually. This is a public meeting that's being streamed live to YouTube and via the council's website. The meeting is also being recorded for the purposes of the minutes. I've been advised that the live stream is now up and running. If for any reason the public can no longer hear or see the meeting over the live streaming, we will have to adjourn until that connection has been re-established. So let's hope there's no glitches in the machine. That's all I can say. Can I remind all members of the meeting etiquette that has been circulated and the procedures that apply for remote attendees? All members should have their microphones muted and cameras turned on, which clearly they have, and I thank you for that. If you do wish to speak on an item, please indicate this by using the chat function or by raising your hand, and I will then call you at the appropriate point. I will ask Nikki, who is the facilitator, to advise me if there are any members who wish to speak that I have not spotted. There will be a captioning throughout the meeting, and you may notice that your wish to speak has been noticed, and you can lower your hand and be rest assured that you will be called upon. Members are reminded that they must remain on camera throughout the meeting, and please ensure that you are alone in the room. Thank you. So, before we start, I'd like to confirm which committee members are present in the chamber. So we have present Councillor Maxine Dixon, Councillor Natalie Hoy. My apologies. Can I just get through the introductions of who's in the chamber, and then I'll come back to that person. So Councillor Natalie Hoy, Councillor Derek Adams, Councillor Paul Cooper, Councillor Liz Smith, Councillor Christopher Kane, Councillor Deborah Watson, and Councillor Duncan McGregor, as well as myself, Councillor Tom Munro, Chair of Planning Committee. To my left, which is right, no doubt, as you see it, we have Sarah Kay, the Planning Manager, and to my right, your left, we have Chris Fidlington, who's the Assistant Director with overall responsibility for planning matters. Who indicated their wish to speak? Could they just indicate again?
Chair, it's Councillor Alan Bailey and James Watson.
Councillor James Watson.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. I wish to raise a point of order in the first instance for you as Chair of the Planning Committee to give me an assurance that the decisions that the Planning Committee are likely to make today are lawfully based. I note that there are quite a number of councillors in the chamber, exceeding the number 6. And I would like to know, from your point of view, whether the regulations are exceeded to, because my understanding is that it has to be reasonably necessary. And I note that 5 councillors in email traffic have just expressed a preference that they wish to be in the chamber. So I'd like, on a point of order, an assurance from you that the decisions that we are likely to make today are based soundly in and are indeed could be lawful. Thank you.
Thank you for your point of order and question, Councillor James Watson. As is the correct procedure at this stage, I will invite our legal representative, Jenny Owen, to give me guidance on that very question. Jenny, are you able to give me guidance, please?
Yes, the conduct of the meeting is under different legislation due to the COVID. There was new legislation introduced so that we could hold a meeting in this hybrid situation.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So I am therefore assured, Councillor James Watson, that we are compliant and therefore that the decisions we will take have, according to the legal officer we have present, will be sound and therefore legally binding and correct. You wish to come back, Councillor James Watson?
Yes, out of this meeting, I don't want to labour it more, but could the legal officer circulate which legislation she's relying on, please, to me, to give that understanding?
If I may, Councillor Watson, what I will do, given that we've had an answer from the legal officer, I will, if you're happy with that, I will ask her to write to you with details of that legislation, and then you will have it in print. Are you happy with that, Councillor Watson?
Yes, indeed, sir. Thank you, Councillor Monroe.
Okay, thank you. Did you? Are you all right with that, Jenny? So you can write to Councillor Watson.
Yes, that's not a problem. I'll send that as soon as I can. Okay.
Thank you. Right, I will now ask Nikki as facilitator to. Was that Councillor Alan Bailey? Yes, Councillor Alan Bailey. I'm so sorry. My apologies.
Good morning, Chairman. Just for the records, please, Chairman, as I am a member of Clown Parish Council, I never attended the Parish Council meeting when the planning application for the Clown planning was discussed. So at no time did I discuss the information about the planning or receive any information about it. That's for the records. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alan Bailey. Just for everybody's information, that is in reference to item number 4, and we've noted your comments. Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Before I go on to ask Nikki to introduce who is joining us remotely, are there any other members, either in the chamber or remotely, who wish to speak before we actually have them introduced? No, good. So Nikki, over to you to tell us who's joined us remotely, please.
Thank you, Chair. Joining remotely today are Councillors Alan Bailey, Anne Clark, Nick Clark, Jim Clifton, Graham Parkin, Janet Tate, James Watson and Jen Wilson. Also remotely, we have a spokesperson today speaking against the application, Richard Whitaker and Michelle Whitaker, and the agent for the Clown application, Darren Abbott. Also online, you have legal representation by Jenny Owen and members of the governance team who are supporting this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Nikki. Right, so if we may, we'll move on to item 1, which is apologies for absence. Donna, are you aware of any apologies for absence?
Chair, we haven't got any apologies because everybody is present here today.
Thank you very much indeed. In that case, I will cheerfully move on to item 2, which is urgent business. And the third item on the agenda is urgent business. However, I have no specific urgent business to talk about at this stage on the agenda. So we'll move on, if we may then, to item 3, which is declarations of interest. We've already heard one declaration, which is de facto a non-declaration of interest by Councillor Alan Bailey. Have you received, Donna or Nikki? Oh, Donna, have you received any declarations of interest in advance of today's meeting, please?
No, Chair, I confirm we've not received any other declarations, but Councillor Bailey's statement has been noted.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any declarations of interest within the chamber, first of all? And any item on today's agenda? No. Are there any declarations of interest? Anybody joining us virtually, please? No. Okay, in that case, we will move on, if we may, to agenda item 4, which is minutes of the last meeting. And that is on pages 4 to 9 in your pack. So first of all, are we happy that they are a correct record? Please, could I have a mover?
Councillor Nick Clark is indicating his wish to speak.
Oh, right. Councillor Nick Clark, please. Yes.
Yes, thanks, Chair. On page 6, towards the bottom, after the comments from Duncan, Councillor McGregor, and before the application was moved, I made a comment which isn't recorded, and that was about the planning inspector regarding the previous application by the same developer, which was turned down by Bolsover District Council, but allowed on appeal by the planning inspector. And he stated that this should not set a precedent for future applications.
Thank you. Is it members' wishes that that be added to the minutes of the meeting? Is it your wish that that be added?
Yes, if so, if you could please, yes.
Right, I'm just checking with people. Are you happy, Councillor Kane, to move the minutes as a true record with that addition, or would you like Councillor Clark just to read it again? Nick, could you possibly just read again what you're saying should be in there, and read it nice and slowly, Nick, please, so we can all
Yes.
catch it.
Yes, certainly. After Councillor McGregor had moved or made his comments on the application, I made a comment in response, which was in the report. There's no comment made from the planning inspector regarding the previous application by the developer, which was originally turned down by Bolsover District Council. This was allowed on appeal by the planning inspector, who has stated that this appeal should not set a precedent for future applications.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Yes, Councillor Deborah Watson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. To my knowledge, the minutes of a planning committee meeting are not verbatim, and there are many times comments that many councillors have made that do not actually appear in the minutes. In fact, I'm sure Councillor Clifton will agree with me on that one. So to add that now without going back and listening to the recording of the meeting, because there may be other pertinent comments that other councillors have made, I think personally that we should just stick with the minutes as are, unless you want to return to a system where you absolutely put down everything that everybody says, and I don't think that's viable.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson.
Chair,
Councillor Clark, did you hear that response?
if I may just comment, Chair, on what is actually contained in the minutes, there is a reference to the meeting noting that the inspector distinguished the appeal that was referred to from the site to the neighbouring site. So it is referenced, although it's not attributed directly to Councillor Clark.
Okay, well, if it's attributed already, then I think, if it's not attributed to Councillor Clark, I don't think that necessarily matters. But if there's a reference to it, then it is de facto included in the minutes. That was actually a statement made by the inspector at the appeal stage on that particular application. Seems very historical, if not rather over the top, to include it in the minutes. Right, so you've heard the comments, Councillor Clark. I'm quite happy to accept the minutes being moved by Councillor Kane as a true record as they are. Is there a seconder, please, for that? It's been seconded by Councillor Deborah Watson. Right, all those in favour? First of all, we'll take those voting remotely. Please, can you indicate by raising your hand in front of your face that you approve the minutes of the meeting for those members voting remotely? I can't see if you're voting or not.
I can see 3 clear votes for, Chair.
Three, four. Anybody voting remotely against?
There
Three.
are 3 against, Chair.
Thank you. All right, so that's 3, 4, 3 against. All right, in the chamber, all those in favour of the minutes, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right, 8. And are there any against in the chamber? Are there any abstentions? There's 1 abstention. Okay,
Chair,
so that.
Chair, I can see 1 abstention online also.
Oh, 1 abstention online. Thank you.
Oh, apologies, that is 2 abstentions, Councillor Janet.
Oh, 2
Tate and
abstentions
James
online.
Dixon.
Right, so the vote is 11-4, if I may. Thank you. Make sure your microphones are off, or if you're on virtual, please. You make sure your microphones are off till you're called to speak, please. Thank you. Well, that's 11 for, 3 against, and 3 abstentions. Councillor James Watson first, and Councillor Maxine Peake. These are just going to remind you people, these are just the minutes of the last meeting. It would be nice to get on to the main body of the meeting and not be pontificating over minutiae, if we don't mind. Let's be honest about this. These are minutes. That's all we're talking about. Right, Councillor James Watson, please. What's
I
your
just want my
point?
attention recorded in the minutes, please. That's all.
Okay, your votes will be recorded in the minutes. I'm quite sure the clerk will have heard that. Councillor Maxine Dixon.
Oh, it's just that I've abstained because I wasn't in attendance to the meeting.
Thank you very much indeed. That doesn't prevent you from voting on minutes, it's just only for future reference. Okay, it doesn't prevent you. Okay. I asked that question years ago. It doesn't prevent you. All right. Okay, let's move on. Right, lovely. Item 5, application to be determined under the Town and Country Planning Act. Erection of 17 dwellings and associated infrastructure, land west of Holmley and Tamarisk and Mansfield Road, Clown. And we will proceed through in the usual way. Right, that's the main business of today's meeting. We've got one application, which we're going to consider. So first of all, I'm going to just invite Donna, who is the clerk, just to take us through how it will actually work, all right? For the benefit of all members and speakers and the public who are watching on YouTube. So Donna, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, you'll be familiar with the process, although we haven't done this for a while. So I'll recap for everybody's benefit as the Chair has outlined. The Chair will introduce the application and then ask the planning manager to give a presentation and refer to any late comments and updates received since the agenda was issued. The Chair will ask the public speakers to turn on their microphones and cameras as they're called on to present their views. We have 3 speakers today. The speakers each have 5 minutes to put forward their view. The first speaker today is also displaying a PowerPoint presentation. There'll be a reminder given when there's 30 seconds remain, and at the end of the speaker's 5 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speakers any questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. There are multiple speakers on the application and they have been asked to refrain from repeating the points already made. When all the speakers on the application have spoken, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate by committee and determination by the vote. The public speakers will be asked to turn off their microphones and cameras at that point. They may remain in the meeting but not speak again. And if they do cause any disruption, they may be asked to leave. The meeting can be watched on YouTube, so that's an alternative for any members of the public who wish to leave once they've spoken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Donna. Right, we'll now move on, if we may, to the dealing with the application. And in line with normal practice, I'm going to invite the planning manager, Sarah Kay, to give a brief descriptive presentation showing any photos and plans of the site and to tell us about any late comments and reports that have been produced. Right, the meeting facilitator, who's Nikki, will share the presentation on the screen, and this might mean that you might find it, that I might find it difficult to see everyone. However, I will be keeping that carefully monitored. Therefore, I will allow officers to complete their presentation and ask members to reserve points or questions about the process until the end. There will be plenty of time for everybody to ask questions. Okay. Right, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Monroe. Can I have the presentation on the screen, please, Nikki? And can we jump to the slide that's entitled Site Location Plan, please? Thank you. So this application is application number 20/00209/FUL. It's an application for 17 dwellings at the site known as Holmley and Tamarisk off Mansfield Road in Clown. Here displayed on the screen at the moment is a site location plan that accompanies the planning application. Just for, again, getting members' bearings in terms of the application site and its location respective to Clown. It's located to the southwest of the village settlement, just off of Mansfield Road. The Avant and Woodall development proposals, which have already been completed, actually adjoin the application site to the north and west. The Ben Bailey development, which is the site of the former Hyash farm, adjoins the application site to the south. And the properties that are known as Homely and Tamarisk are the two detached properties that join the application site to the east. You'll see the red line boundary for the application site shown there on the site location plan on the screen. Can we jump to the next slide, please, Nikki? So this is an aerial image of the application site itself. This is an extract taken from the most up-to-date Google images that are available in terms of showing aerial photographs. You'll see the centralized field is the field that's it has been cut and is centralized to the image. That's the application site itself. You can also see on this particular image the properties that are just referenced, the Avant and the Woodall development to the north and the west of the site, and the two detached properties to the east. You'll also see on this particular image, it's not quite up to date, but the scrubbed area to the south is the Ben Bailey development. That parcel of land is already under construction. It's actually almost nearing completion. And it's that scrubbed area where you can see an access has been created onto Mansfield Road as well. And that's where the application site access is proposed for this particular proposal. Can you jump to the next slide, please, Nikki? Thank you. So this is the proposed site layout plan itself. As I've mentioned just in the introduction, this is an application which is submitted in full. It's a residential development comprising 17 individual dwellings. The site layout drawing that is displayed on the screen, you'll see that the development will actually take its access from the new access road that's been formed to the Ben Bailey development to the south of the site. And in addition to that, there's also a new proposed public footpath connection leading into the site from the north, which will actually take itself from the adjacent development site and the road that's known as Fallowfield. In terms of the makeup and the composition of the application proposals, we're looking at 15 detached properties and 2 semi-detached properties, and that will comprise of 8 different house types that have been submitted with the application drawings, and it will be composed of 9 bungalows and 7 two-storey dwellings altogether. Can you jump to the next slide, please, Nikki? So this is the proposed site sections that have been submitted with the application submission. There are four images there on the screen that you can see. So 4 individual sections that have been prepared showing how the development will be formed and showing its relationship to the neighbouring properties. The top section, the top image on this screen is showing a section running north to south. So if you're just looking and focusing on the main top drawing at the moment, you'll see a bungalow on the right-hand side. That's actually the bungalow on Fallowfield, and then the development that extends beyond that on the top image back towards the south is the development proposals itself. The 2 middle images, which are slightly larger, they're just 2 sections across the application site itself. So that's what the development itself will look like. You'll see there a combination of 2-storey and bungalow developments proposed. And again, the smaller section at the bottom of the screen is just again another north-south section taken through the site. It's difficult to see on this screen. I appreciate that, but in terms of the levels and the slight level changes that are proposed, which are illustrated by these site sections, there will be an increase in levels across the site, and that increase will be focused along the northern edge of the application site boundary adjacent to the properties on Fallowfield. So that's why you'll see I pointed out the bungalow on Fallowfield on that top section and that top image on the screen as well. The next few slides will just be some site photographs that I've taken that will, again, they were presented with members on the site visit that took place last week, but these are photographs just putting into context the application site and what it currently looks like. So this first slide is taken from the rear gardens of Tamarisk. That was looking west. We've now jumped to the next photograph. Sorry, can we jump back again, Nikki? The next one again is also looking west, positioned at the end of the access road, looking in a west and southwesterly direction. So you can see there, obviously, the predominant part of the application site is cleared or just grassland. But from these images, you can see that there are hedgerows and mature trees aligning the application site boundaries to the northwest and south as well. The next photograph, please, Nikki, is taken from the Ben Bailey access road. That's where the new access into this planning application development will be located. And that's us currently looking west into the Ben Bailey access and the Ben Bailey development. The next slide, please, Nikki. Is again me stood on the Ben Bailey access road, actually this time looking to the east, back towards the Mansfield Road connection. So that's the access road for members, just for reference. The next slide, please, Nikki, is an image taken from Fallowfield. I've actually said this is from the Avant housing development, but it's the Avant and Woodall development that's located to the north. And just for, again, for members' reference to that public footpath connection that I talked about on the site location and the site layout drawing, that public footpath connection has already been facilitated and provided between these two properties on Fallowfield, and the connection and the application proposals will link to this footpath that you can see in that photograph on the screen there as well. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? So in terms of this particular application and the details that are set out in the officer's report for highlighting the main issues that members need to have regard to and the main considerations, they relate to the principle of development itself, considerations associated with highway safety, the landscape and visual impacts of the development, whether the development has a suitable design, whether design layout and its approach provides sufficient residential amenity to the future occupants of this development and the occupants of the residents that adjoin the application site. There's also issues in regard to ecology, contamination, drainage, and impacts on potential impacts on infrastructure in the surrounding area. And there's also a section, a chapter in the officer's report that details heritage and archaeological impacts as well. Of particular note for members in terms of the officer report, sorry, Nikki, can we just jump back to the screen first, please? Sorry, yeah. Of note in terms of for members in terms of the main considerations, I'd just like to highlight a few points. That is that obviously the site is allocated for residential development under policy LC1 of the local plan. The site does already benefit from an extant planning permission for 15 dwellings, which can still be implemented. The site's not regarded as a distinct or sensitive landscape itself, either collectively or alone. And the conclusions are that an appropriate access can be formed to serve the development proposals as well. The applicant has worked with the officer and with the development control team to amend and revise the scheme to achieve a suitable layout and an overall design that we have concluded does accord with the requirements of the housing layout and design supplementary planning document. This allows the application proposals to achieve an appropriate relationship with the neighbouring properties in terms of separation distances, house types, levels, etc. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? Thank you. So just in terms of updating members, you will have seen that there was an update report circulated late yesterday on the ModGov agenda, and I think some members have picked that up as they come into the committee chamber this morning as well in terms of paper copies. That supplementary report just sets out some further details that we've received in terms of amendments. So there were further drainage amendment drawings submitted after the officer's report was prepared. We've also received some additional publicity responses from neighbour representations and also some consultee responses as well that are detailed in that update report. Nothing in terms of the publicity to report in terms of additional considerations. In terms of consultee responses, there are two main additional comments to note, one from the Derbyshire County Council Highways team and one from the Lead Local Flood Authority, which we're just ironing out some technical issues in terms of the layout of the proposals and the drainage connections, which were just ongoing whilst we've and resolved after we'd prepared the main officer report. In terms of an update as well, I can actually verbally update members this morning that we've received a further confirmation email from the Lead Local Flood Authority to confirm that they are going to withdraw their concerns in terms of the drainage proposals and the drainage calculations. They are now happy that the drainage details submitted satisfy what they need and are satisfactory in terms of a design solution. They just asked to provide some slight further detail in terms of conditions for achieving and securing that drainage design to be imposed if we do conclude today that planning permission can be granted. So in terms of conclusions and in terms of the officer report and conclusions, in light of the previous planning permission, the extant permission, the local plan allocation, permission here for residential development is weighed heavily in favour of granting planning permission. we've achieved an acceptable layout and amenity level for the existing and the proposed properties, such that we are able to put forward a recommendation that the application is approved. 106 contributions that are set out in the officer's report as well. Just wanting to reference to members, there were 16 conditions set in the original officer report, but in the supplementary report that was circulated yesterday, there are actually some additional conditions from the Highways Authority that are also referenced. So there are actually 20 conditions at the moment, and potentially a need to just iron out some of the drainage details with the Lead Local Flood Authority. So there may be a couple of additional conditions that need to be imposed as well. So I'm just asking members if they're happy to leave that with officers if the application is approved today. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Thank you. As I did explain at the beginning, that the planning manager, Sarah, has outlined. I will return in discussion with the clerk, Donna, later to the issue of the supplementary document. I'll come to that, back to that later. So now we are going to move on. We have a total of 3 speakers, 2 who wish to speak in opposition to the application, and a speaker who will represent the developers. So our first speaker is Richard Whittaker. So I would now invite Richard Whittaker to make sure his camera is turned on and his microphone. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
If you just like to wait a minute, Richard, and I will ask Nikki if she is ready with your presentation if you need it. Nikki, are you ready with the presentation?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, Richard, the floor is yours. I would remind you, you have a total of 5 minutes, Richard, in which to make your representation. Over to you, Richard. Thank you.
If you could put the presentation up, please. Chair, there should be a oh, okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. What I would say is we don't object to the overall development in principle. We object to its overbearing nature. And the first slide shows some pictures of our small garden. And Bolsover's successful places planning guide is quite clear that it should not create overbearing relationships between buildings where this would be detrimental to residential amenity, and relationships between buildings that result in excessive dominance or overshadowing of habitable spaces. Now, my rear garden is only just over 8 metres long. It's flanked by brickwork either side. And the open aspect is essential to our enjoyment. And the top right picture is the view to the rear of our garden with our 1.8 metre high fence. So it shows the current level of amenity benefits that we've got. And the picture was taken in November, and you can see the shadowing impact at the worst time of year. Next slide, please. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So if you look at the top left picture, you can see the tree. The fence is a representation of our rear fence at 1.8 metres high. And this is a large bungalow, and it's massing and dominance. It is unreasonably overbearing. And it's contributed to by the pitch of the roof, which is too steep and just creates unusable space for that property. So, and I also believe it's unreasonable to be so flexible to reduce the separating distance from 21 metres with obscure glass, when at 12 metres, the property should be angled to prevent more privacy. So, and all that contributes to making it unacceptable in terms of successful places. And it's insensitive and disrespectful to neighbours and neighbouring properties. Could I have the next slide, please? So, There's been no cross sections or dimensions submitted to support planning officers with a recommendation, but our property is the same archetype as what's been proposed. And with the increase in levels, you know, this is a substantive bungalow, is almost as high as our garden is long. And that makes it as tall as a house at over 7 meters and only 12 meters away from us. So the flexibility that's shown with the 25-degree rule should be applied to the, so the separating distance should be applied to the 25-degree rule to protect our amenity and support our enjoyment of our rear garden. The bottom window is almost 1 meter above the top of our fence, and the obscure glass could be changed in the future so that we have overlooking issues. There are non-permitted developments in relation to extensions, but that only applies to the properties at the other side of the bungalow and not to us. That is not acceptable either. The extent planning permission does not overrule the local plan, and density has to be considered with other factors to determine this development is well designed. And it's a small increase in density, but it's a massive impact on us as neighbours. And I believe the bungalow should be removed to provide visitor parking and avoid the overspill issues. The garage should be at the opposite side against our boundary and should be a parking space at existing ground level. And that will give a good, clear separation and clear space and reduce the massing and overbearing identity of this sort of dwelling. So that gives me a reasonable level of amenity. And if we go to the next slide, please. So the footpath link, this is quite short. It doesn't benefit from successful surveillance. It's a kitchen window. We're not in the kitchen all the time, only at meal times. The surveillance is also obscured by cars that are parked on the drive. And the government's safe places and planning policy is clear in that direct routes should not undermine defensible space. We've already had graffiti, dog fouling and snooping, so I'd prefer it to be closed. But if it's opened, then I would ask that the non-permitted development condition that prevents me from increasing the security from the 400 high knee rail, which was on the previous presentation, is removed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Before you turn your mic off or anything, members do have the right to ask you any questions on details. So I'll now, first of all, if are there any members, first of all in the chamber, I've got one hand up already. So Councillor Derek Adams, your question to Mr. Whittaker, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could I see first slide again, please? And could I see the top right-hand photo because it's obscured? Thank you.
Are you able to oblige, please, Nikki?
My apologies. Which picture would you like?
We need the slide, first slide, because the one at the top right-hand picture was obscured. First slide of Mr. Whittaker's presentation, please. Right. We're just going to, that's it, lovely. So that's the, okay, is that what you wanted? Okay, so it wasn't a question. Right, if you can take the presentation off, please. Right, are there any other members in the chamber who want to ask Mr. Whittaker a question, please? No? Are there any members virtually who would like to ask a question? Yes, Councillor Alan Bailey. Alan Bailey, please.
Yes, morning, Richard. Listening to comments that you gave, my first comments I would like to ask, please, are the ecological study that was taken of this site, the old orchard, which backs on to Farrowfields, where you live. There are aspects of wildlife. There's going to be an impact on wildlife, bats, owls, and other living animals. They will be lost to this site. Is that correct? Thank you.
Councillor Bailey, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but that is not a question that in any way, shape or form has been addressed by Mr. Whittaker in his presentation. You are perfectly able, when we get into discussion, to ask the planning officer those questions. That is not a question or an issue that Mr. Whittaker has raised in his presentation, and therefore
Right then.
I'm not going to permit
Thank you. Well, my other question is the pathway which is going to be brought through from the development through to Farrowfields, right? As I understand it, at the minute, all the tenants look after the area where they live. If you bring this alleyway through, you're going to get people coming from the new site to where he lives, correct? And parking, there wouldn't, the people, there isn't enough parking now for the residents where they live. So there would be nothing stopping people parking their cars, walking through the alleyway or through to the new development. Is that correct?
Mr. Whittaker, would you like to respond to the question about the pathway?
Yes, that is correct. It creates a direct sort of route to our estate, which creates an opportunity for overspill parking, and that can potentially impact on emergency vehicle access for us as residents. Because it's not observed, it also puts us at risk in terms of burglary. And we've had an aggressive burglary, but because of the open, wide, surveyed sort of routes we have now, people were arrested within 24 hours because of CCTV. There are none of those benefits for this path. It's a shortcut through and just an opportunist haven.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Whittaker. Are there any further members remotely who wish to ask Mr. Whittaker a question on his presentation? Councillor James Watson.
Hello, Mr. Whittaker. My name is James Watson. I represent Kingston on Boswell District Council. On your point about the overbearing nature from the building that's due for plot 5, and you gave some figures there. Is that overbearing nature also added to because on that side of the development they are actually building up for the drainage facilities? Is that why the building is so high in your view, or could you help me there?
It is. It's a significant increase, around a metre and a half for ground levels for a drainage solution when there are alternatives. The garage is at the other side of the bungalow when it could be adjacent to our boundary at the existing ground level and reduce its impact. And because it's such a big bungalow, we all think bungalows are small. This is not big bungalows. It's a 5.7 metre high bungalow to its ridge, roughly. And it's above 7 metres with the ground levels. That is a significant height difference for something that is only 12 metres away. And it's overbearing and disrespectful to a bungalow that is small.
And would that present any surface water runoff problems for you, do you think?
I'm not aware of any because I've not seen the drainage. It does turn our rear garden well into a prison yard because I'm flanked by 2 brick walls now, and then I've got a really big, massive concrete tiled roof. That's all I've got. My original slide showed what I was losing in terms of amenity value.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Thank you, Mr. Whittaker.
Thank you.
Right, if we can just make sure mics are off, that would be helpful. Thank you. Yes. Are there any other people joining us remotely who have a question for Mr. Whittaker? Right, in that case, if I may, I'll move on to our second speaker. Oh, I'm very sorry, there's one in the chamber. Councillor Natalie Hoy, to Mr. Whittaker.
Hi, Richard. Just to give us an idea of size in relation to your bungalow, what's the size difference to this new proposed development bungalow to yourself, to the one that you live in? What's the height difference?
It's the height is the same because it's the same design of bungalow. They've just spun the roof round to meet the 25-degree rule. It's the increase in height that impacts on it, and if it had a lower pitch roof or the garage in a different place, it would minimise the impact on us as residents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. We'll now move on, if we may, please, to our second speaker, who is Michelle Whittaker. So have we got Michelle on image, please? Oh, quick.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just swapping camera with Richard.
Okay, Michelle. Do you also have a presentation you want to use, Michelle?
I haven't a presentation, but I have
Okay,
something I'd like to read out.
Makes life nice and simple. Okay, Michelle, you have 5 minutes. First of all, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
And I'll now hand over to you to make your presentation. Thank you very much.
Right. I'd like to say the revised proposal fails to respect neighbouring dwellings, ignores opportunities to retain and improve amenity, nor facilitates turning a wildlife no net loss into biodiversity gain. Much is made of the principle of housing and development need, but equally important aspects of the local plan and national planning policy framework concerning provision and retention of green spaces and the benefits these have for the surrounding community appear ignored. It is also disappointing to see that the applicant has not been positively encouraged to incorporate these other considerations into the site. In support of our objections, I refer to the following adopted local plan objectives: recognising the multiple benefits of blue and green infrastructure in new development, careful consideration of the impacts of proposed development, protecting, enhancing, extending, and the better integration of green infrastructure and ecological networks, protecting ancient woodland and ancient stroke veteran trees, to recognise the value of open space within communities, and to safeguard and, where possible, expand an integrated network of well-managed green infrastructure assets within and beyond communities, as set out in the Council's Green Infrastructure Study. To recognise the multiple benefits provided by green infrastructure and access to the natural environment on people, wildlife, health, well-being and economic prosperity. To address identified deficiencies and gaps in green infrastructure, improving accessibility. To seek positive opportunities to include open space, natural green space, trees and woodland in new development. The National Planning Policy Framework also states an environmental objective to contribute to protecting and enhancing our natural, built and historic environment, including making effective use of land and helping to improve biodiversity. It is mentioned in the Planning Officer's assessment that whilst the local plan is expected to deliver 15 dwellings, this is not a policy requirement, and consideration must be given to whether 17 dwellings is acceptable on its individual design merits. As part of this consideration, I refer to the following extract from the Urban Design Officer's report. Increasing the density, even slightly, on a constrained site will have implications and can still represent an overdevelopment. Therefore, attention must be given to all aspects relating to its design in order for the process to be deemed balanced and fair. We advocate admitting 2 plots and revising the site layout to save the existing green space around the orchard and its associated wildlife. Retaining an established space where wildlife already thrives to create a community amenity area will in turn promote mental health and well-being of not just the new residents, but of the neighbouring developments who also enjoy this amenity. It is noted that the planning officer states that Clown has an under-provision of open space, so why hasn't this been an important factor in this application? We risk having many small developments surrounding one another, each having less than the number of dwellings required to consider open space provision, but adding up to one large area of development with little or no green space amenity for the community they've created. Saying that payment towards improving facilities at the Arc or the Edge will make up for this is not enough. When lockdown happened, and if it happens again, such facilities are closed, and the community relies on the amenity spaces around their own homes. Also, community members who are unable to use these facilities are left out of the equation. A revised layout also means the development would be a respectful neighbour to its adjacent sites, allowing for better location of large house types, reduce the need for raised ground levels, meaning proposed dwellings would no longer overlook or be overbearing to existing bungalows or too close to other existing houses and trees. It should also be noted that there are outstanding issues to be clarified and solutions put forward for decision at the meeting. With time constraints and absence of site visits, this does not allow for proper investigation.
30 seconds remaining.
It also does not allow existing residents to examine any solutions that may impact on them and raise concerns. There is scope within this application proposal to move forward and address previous oversights and shortfalls, and we strongly urge the Planning Committee to take this opportunity. We want a community to be proud of, and one which we can say raised awareness of how much benefit can be gained by encouraging planning applications
Chair.
of the surrounding neighbourhood and environment.
Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker. Right, if you'd just like to remain ready to answer any questions that members may have. Are there any members, first of all, in the chamber who may wish to ask Mrs. Whittaker any questions? No? Right, are there any members, please, who are joining us virtually who'd like to ask a question? Yes, Councillor Nick Clark, first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Michelle, to your knowledge, has a count of different wildlife species, including bats, being conducted or carried out on the proposed development? And if they were to be displaced, do you know of any suitable habitats nearby where they could be relocated to?
No, I'm not aware of any. I'm not seeing anything.
Right,
No, and I'm not aware of any habitats where they were going, because it just seems that further fields that we can see are now under sort of like development consideration.
Yeah, so to your knowledge, no, there's been no independent counts by the local residents?
No.
If I may, I'm just, Nick, if I may, Nick, I'm just going to ask Planning Manager Sarah Kay to comment on your question.
Thank you, Chair.
Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So I note that Councillor Clark asked about whether there's been any independent surveys undertaken of bats in particular, but I can just make a point of clarification. There is an ecological survey that's been submitted with the planning application itself. That's been considered by Derbyshire Wildlife Trust and is reported in the officer's recommendation, the officer report as well. So there has been relevant survey work undertaken to the satisfaction that we can actually make a decision on the application today. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Did you want to come back, Nick?
No, thank you. That's fine. As
okay. Are there any other members joining us remotely who have a question for Michelle Whittaker?
Councillor Alan Bailey,
yes,
Chair.
Councillor Janet Tate, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've just picked up on something that Michelle said, and that is about the green space issue. And although this plan allows for extra monies to be paid to improve existing play areas, obviously, as she rightly said, a play area doesn't benefit everybody in the community, especially if that community consists mainly of bungalows. They're probably going to be older people that would benefit from a green space rather than improvements to a playground. And I think that is the point she was trying to make. Am I right on that, Michelle?
Yes, that is one of the points, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else remotely want to ask a question of Michelle?
Councillor Alan Bailey, Chair.
Pardon?
Councillor Alan Bailey,
Councillor Alan
Chair.
Bailey, my apologies. Councillor Bailey.
My question to Mrs. Whittaker is along the same lines as Councillor Nick Clark. If the orchard, which is presently there, was to be built upon, there, what she's saying and what I'm asking, there would be a loss of nature and wildlife, i.e. bats and birds and other things that are presently there. So if that site was to be built on, you would lose this, what is presently there. Thank you.
Yes, that's right. It's just that we're quite aware of the residents do see bats. We've not done counts, but we do see the bats. We hear the owls. We see the birds that sort of like live in the orchards and the hedgerows. And also, it's the worry that with things like mammals like hedgehogs, they're on the decline. They're talking about extinction in a few years' time of something, like a hedgehog. And these live in is around the orchards and the base of the hedgerows, and to disturb them and think they'll just move on to somewhere else is wrong. They've got nowhere else to go. And if you're continually moving wildlife out and destroying its habitat, you're destroying the wildlife. It's all right saying, you know, these birds will find somewhere else to nest. These hedgehogs will find somewhere else to live. But in the finding of somewhere else to live is where they get destroyed. That, you know, you can't replace them. You can't magic up, you can't plant some trees somewhere else on the site or a hedgerow and a hedgehog will magically appear. You've got to preserve what you've got.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
No further questions? Right, thank you very much indeed for your presentation, Michelle. We'll now move on, if we may, to the third presentation. And the third presentation is to be made by Darren Abbott, who is the agent representing the developer. So would Darren Abbott like to turn on his camera?
Hello.
Good morning, Mr.
Good morning.
Abbott.
Good morning.
And welcome to our planning committee meeting.
Thank you.
The floor is now yours. Do you have a presentation that you need to work with Nikki on?
No, just verbal, thank you.
Right. So you have 5 minutes, Darren, and we'll now invite you to give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today. I am Darren Abbott of DLP Planning Limited, representing the applicant Woodall Homes, whom are delighted to have the opportunity to progress the application site at Clown. As is detailed in the office presentation, the site is a relatively small rectangular parcel of land bound by residential development to all sides, notably as a result of recent comprehensive development to the south, west and north. Consistent with this, the site currently benefits from a live full planning permission granted recently in 2018 for 15 dwellings, subsequent to an earlier outline approval in 2016. The council considers that this is a sustainable location in one of the district's largest settlements, and effectively the principle of building new homes at this site has been firmly established, with the scheme able to be developed. Further, as an allocated in-settlement site through policy LT1 of the local plan, it forms part of the council's recently adopted strategy to deliver new homes in the district required to meet identified housing need. The proposal before you offers a revised scheme design interpretation and also an alternative, more favourable point of access off the adjacent High Ash Farm development to the south, rather than direct from Mansfield Road. This is an access arrangement envisaged and effectively approved as part of that development's agreed layout as detailed on the approved drawing, and avoids two junctions close to one another on Mansfield Road. Linkages to the neighbouring developments at High Ash Farm and Fallowfield are proposed as per previously approved, and this ensures permeability and sustainability. In turn, you will be aware that national policy requires the efficient use of land, and whilst the proposal before you seeks a modest 2 further homes from that are previously approved, this would not fundamentally alter the characteristics of the site itself, that being one of residential development. The quantum of development proposed would also offer a greater contribution to the supply and delivery of sustainably located housing provision in the district, this being a significant material consideration in the context of the national housing crisis. The proposed development provides a choice and mix of properties through a range of 4 and 3 bedroom 2-storey houses and 3 bedroom bungalows, offering a varied grain in terms of scale and design that assimilates well with the established built form that surrounds. Further, the provision of bungalows not only meets general housing need, but also offers provision for people with disabilities and or those wishing to downsize, thus potentially freeing up larger housing stock, as is advocated in your local plan and the national planning guidance. We've worked closely with your officers and key statutory consultees throughout the application process to ensure compliance with planning policies, resulting in no statutory objections against the scheme. This includes the county highways, the lead local flood authority, Severn Trent Water and Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. And as you've heard from the residents of the neighbouring occupiers, neighbouring properties as well, the plot 5 has been reduced from a 2-storey dwelling to a bungalow as is now proposed. In terms of drainage, testing undertaken to date confirms that the soakways are appropriate for use and are therefore proposed for surface water disposal, which includes use of a swale and soakaways for infiltration purposes. All surface water will be contained within the site, and this is a position that the local lead flood authority confirmed their agreement to, raising no objection. With reference to ecology, robust assessments have been undertaken and detail that no significant ecology or protected species interests exist, nor is any specific mitigation required other than that usually expected for such development sites. Dwellings are offset from site boundaries to promote retention of the boundary hedgerows and mature trees to the site periphery, with enhanced landscaping proposed, further encouraging and enhancing biodiversity. Conditions are proposed including associated construction, environmental and landscape biodiversity enhancement management plans, with the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust raising no objection in this regard. To ensure that the required infrastructure is in place to support the development on delivery, the applicant is committed to providing the full suite of planning obligations requested, namely contributions towards education provision, enhancement of playing pitches and all their facilities at Gloves Lane Recreation Ground, and improvements to the equipped play areas at the Arc and or the Edge, as well as recreation ground in terms of pedestrian cycle links to the town centre.
30 seconds remaining.
In conclusion, being minded of the live planning permission on this sustainable site, allocation in the recently adopted local plan, compatibility with the surrounding land uses, no objections from statutory consultees, and the agreement to deliver off-site policy compliant requirements, and provision of robust evidence clearly supporting the proposals and approach applied, we would welcome your support in backing your officer recommendation in this instance to approve the full application, particularly in the absence of any significant or demonstrable harm. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentation, Darren. If you can just remain on screen ready for any questions that might come from members. So if you just, your forbearance. I have already had one indication in the chamber from Councillor Maxine Dixon. Councillor Dixon, question to Darren, please.
Good morning, Darren.
Good morning.
I'm new on planning, so forgive me if my question may seem ridiculous to you, but it's not to me. Looking on the plans, it just looks as though you've probably given the minimum distance between bungalows, houses, gardens, parking, etc. And I did note that you said in 2018 it was planning permission for 15 dwellings, but there are now 17.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on this, please?
Yes, so there's been a reappraisal of the development capacity for this site, and this is advocated through the NPPF. The national planning policy requires an efficient use of land. Now, the approved scheme is for 15 units, which equates to 18 dwellings per hectare. The 17 units proposed is 20 dwellings per hectare, so a very modest increase in the quantum of development on site. Now, the separation distances have all been achieved in accordance with the council's adopted planning guidance in that respect. And that is sufficient to avoid any loss of privacy or overbearing impact that may result. Obviously, this is a small infill site that is envisaged for development in the council's strategy to deliver to meet housing need across the district. And this reappraisal essentially brings forward this site, which is the final parcel for the comprehensive development in this sustainable location, as has previously been established through the two earlier permissions.
Councillor Dixon, you have to come back.
Yes, please. You say it's putting an extra 2 dwellings is a fairly modest increase, but it's not a modest increase when you divide that up between the properties. The modest increase shared out would give a considerable amount of space between each property.
The garden sizes and the parking arrangements, etc., are in accordance with the council's design guide, and the locations for the dwellings accord with the previous approvals. So in terms of where the footplate of the plots are, they're generally in accordance with what has previously been approved. Obviously, if there were greater standards for garden space, etc., in your policy, then that would be something that we would look to consider and accord with. But this has been considered by the council's urban designer in terms of the plot layout, the coverage, the extent of garden serving each of those plots, and it does accord with your planning policy and your planning guidance.
Thank you, Darren. Are there any other members, first of all, in the chamber who wish to ask questions? I myself have got some questions, but I'd rather take any questions now from anybody who is joining us remotely. Are there any questions from any members joining us remotely? Councillor Jim Clifton, first of all. Councillor Clifton, you need to turn your microphone on. We can't hear a word of your wise words.
There you go. Can you hear me now, Chair? I'm okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Right, thank you, thank you. Mr. Abbott was just discussing design, etc., and said it satisfies the council's plans, etc. But if you check page 15, we're talking about design. It states there that the design does not satisfy policy SC3.
Sorry,
and
where,
it goes up,
where are you?
SC3.
Can you just point me to where of the
page 15, the report?
The committee report.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Page 15, design. Subheading.
Can I just invite the officer, Sarah Kay, to comment on that? And then I invite Darren to make any further comment if he wishes to. So if you just turn your microphones off, and I'll invite Sarah to make a response.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, page 15 and the design and underlined section on that particular page, that's a summary of the neighbour representation. So they're saying it's obviously their opinion that the design doesn't meet with policy SC3. It's not part of the officer's assessment. That's what the neighbour representations have said.
Thank you for that clarification. Does that answer your question, Councillor Clifton?
Well, with regard to the space, the distance, etc., then, Chair, obviously that's been covered by building control and complies. Would that be correct?
I believe the answer to that would be in the affirmative, but I'm going to ask Darren from the point of view of the agent if that is true.
Sorry, I missed the question. Did you say does the separation distance comply with building regulations?
Control.
Yes.
Well, that would be a separate approval process. So building regulations and planning legislation are two separate processes. This application before you relates to amenity in a policy sense. So it does satisfy your guidance in that regard. As far as I'm aware, from a building regulations perspective, there is no requirement for certain separation distances in the context of amenity as building regulations concerns the structural requirements and safety requirements for construction of properties and buildings.
Thank you.
Can I just refer you to Councillor Jim Clifton? Can I refer you? If you care to read pages 20 and 21, that's where you will find the comments on design and layout from our officers in their summation prior to their final recommendation. Okay, hopefully that clarifies that for you. Are there any further? Oh yes, Councillor James Watson wishes to ask Darren a question on his presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Monroe. Mr. Abbott, my name is James Watson. I represent the people of Pinkston on Bolsover District Council. So my point here relates to the stuff that you mentioned about the efficiency of the site, because we have an extent planning permission 15 houses, and this application is for 17 houses, bungalows. So is the previous application, the extent application, therefore, in your opinion, inefficient?
Thank you. It is to a degree inefficient, but it's it uses different access arrangements, and therefore efficiencies are improved by virtue of using the access arrangement off the High Ash Farm development, which is a position envisaged at that time when that application was approved. So what this does as a result of having a shorter access road within the site itself, it enables the efficiency of the scheme currently before you to be improved. But yes, in terms of the former approval, the 2018 approval for 15 units, that is 18 dwellings per hectare. This is 20 dwellings per hectare, which is very, very low density still. This would result in a greater and much improved efficiency of the site in itself.
But is efficiency, if it is therefore more efficient on that basis because of the structure of the road, is this application, in your opinion, compliant with policy SC3 paragraph L, which I'll read out for the members, benefit the members of the committee. It says, to promote the health, economic and social well-being, amenity and safety of the population through both overall design and the provision of open and public spaces. It seems in this design where for 15 dwellings there would be an opportunity to have some open spaces, that in this design with 17 dwellings, and from what the layout that you've put, then there's very little opportunity, in fact no opportunity except for that drainage ditch sort of thing for an open space. Is that correct?
Before you answer, Darren, can I just ask Councillor Watson, would you just pop your microphone off while you're waiting to hear your answer? Thank you. Thank you very much. Darren, over to you.
Thank you. So the site layout that is put before you includes incidental open space to the eastern boundary, and that includes a swale as well, and that obviously has its associated ecological and amenity value in that regard. But in terms of the requirement for open space on site, this is dictated by the recently adopted local plan policy ITCR5, which doesn't require on-site open space for schemes of less than 25 units, but rather that contributions are put forward for appropriate schemes in the local area, which have been identified by the council. So in that regard, we are policy compliant in that respect, and we have agreed to the full suite of planning obligations that have been requested by your leisure teams in terms of the improvements and maintenance of the equipped play areas, and also the linkages to recreation areas and play and pitch quality and associated facilities. The scheme that was approved in 2018 has less incidental open space than is the case here. That's focused to the northern boundary in the 2018 scheme, and as you can see on the current layout before you, the incidental open space with this scheme, coupled with the contributions that are policy compliant, is indeed allowing for those amenity benefits and indeed the health and well-being for occupants of the development.
Thank you very much indeed for that response, Darren. Right, are there any other questions from any? Yes, Councillor Alan Bailey, please, first, then Councillor Janet Tate. So Councillor Alan Bailey first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Rather than repeat everything what Councillor Watson's just said, I would just like to say that I totally agree with his comments. There would have been some of my comments, but I am not going to repeat it all. But I'd just like to say that what Councillor Watson said would be the feeling of myself. Thank you.
On a point of information, first of all, Councillor Watson asked a question. He didn't give a view. We're not yet at the stage of giving views. And secondly, I would just like to point out, Councillor Watson, on a point of, and it is information, that if you look at the plans on page 11, that on the eastern side of the plot, there is a quite large area of land available that will not be built on and that will be available to residents once the development is completed as open space. It will not be developed because underneath it is a significant drainage, a set of drainage pipes that have to be protected. That's just so for your information. If you hadn't picked that up on the plan, Councillor Watson. Now, I'm not
I
taking.
wasn't aware I mentioned it in my point.
I'm not taking any more questions or points, Councillor Watson. Thank you. Councillor Janet Tate, question to Darren.
Yes, Darren. In relation to plot 5, which seems to be the main concern of the speakers today, what would be the implications of redesigning that plot by switching the garage to the other side? It just seems to me as though that would be an easy fix. I could be wrong, but it would make life so much better for the people that already live there. It will be an overbearing bungalow. It has got to be on a built-up site, and you know, surely there is something that can be done to alleviate the problems for the people that already live there.
Darren?
Yeah, thank you. So plot 5, just to take a step back, was originally proposed as a 2-storey dwelling in that particular position, and that has been revised to a bungalow and then further revised to a bungalow with a hit roof rising away from the neighbouring property and indeed the site boundary. Now that arrangement is betterment from the arrangement that was approved in the 2018 application. So that was a bungalow with a gable that faced onto the neighbouring plot. Now, if you were to alter the arrangement for the garage and the access drive, this would then cause problems with access and egress safely from the site, because obviously the arrangement of having vehicles going into that location, given the arrangement that is proposed here, wouldn't lend itself well to access and egress in a forward gear. But in terms of considering the acceptability of the arrangement currently before you, the guidance that is set out, and indeed it is guidance, relates to a 25-degree rule of thumb, as it were, and essentially you take a 25-degree angle, and it's usually from a 2-meter point of the neighbouring property. And if the dwelling, building, whatever, were to bisect that line, then there's an argument that there would be an overbearing and harmful impact on the amenity of those residents. Now, in this regard, the relationship is wholly compliant and well exceeds that 25-degree principle. So, taken from the 2-meter point of the neighbouring property, the relationship is 16 degrees. Taken from the base of the window of the neighbouring plot, it's 19 degrees. And at worst case scenario, if you were to take it from indeed the ground level, then it would be 22 degrees where the ridge would bisect. So it's the relationship is wholly acceptable in planning terms. The separation distance of 12 meters also accords with the guidance in that regard. And you'll note that in terms of the planning conditions that are suggested, the side window serving that property is to be fixed and obscurely glazed and retained in perpetuity, such that it can't be removed in the future unless it was subject to a further application, of which members officers would have the opportunity to consider at that time. But it is a small window that's proposed to the side, a secondary window, and for that to be fixed and obscurely glazed, the applicant's in agreement to that.
Thank you for your response, Darren. Just for your information, Councillor Tate, that is a question you're perfectly at liberty to then ask later on when we get on to members' questions to the planning officer, and generally members making points. You can seek further clarification from the planning manager on that very issue, if you so wish. Are there any other members remotely who wish to ask a question to Darren? Nick Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I've been through, or read through the report, and I can find no mention in the design about electric vehicle charging points, Darren. Could you comment on that, please?
Darren?
Yes, thank you. We, as a responsible builder, would all regularly install electric points within the garages of those property. And indeed, if that was something that was that members felt it appropriate to secure equally by condition, then we would happily agree to that. But as a standard construction technique, and indeed in accordance with building regulations as well, the electrical points are installed in the garages and or on the sidewalls of the property.
Thank you for your question, Nick. Just to follow that up, Darren, as a driver of an electric vehicle, hopefully if that was put in as a condition, then would you be able to provide the right level of electric supply? Because to charge an electric car, which is low on charge on an ordinary 13 amp plug, will take on average 36 to 48 hours. So you need to be mindful of the fact that for reasonable level charges, which is a type 2 for your information, you would need a higher level voltage rating in your provision. Just a point for your consideration.
Yes, understood.
Okay. Are there any other questions remotely from anybody? No? Right. I'm going to ask Donna a question before I ask Darren my question. Donna, I've looked just while I've been sat in the meeting on Modern Gov, and I cannot find the supplementary notes that we have had in the chamber on there. Have the supplementary notes been sent out as a separate attachment to members joining us remotely?
Chair, the supplement was published through modern.gov, so it should be on the app. It might be that you need to refresh yours, but okay. It was sent by email, and there was a link in that email that members can access it on the website. It's also a public document, so it is on the main website.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Watson, are you telling me you have seen it? You have seen it. Okay, right. Well, my question to you, Darren, relates to the latest response from Derbyshire County Council in respect of whether or not the highway will be an adopted highway or not. And in the present document, the latest documentation, which is in our supplementary information sheet, the implications are that the authority at this stage, I believe it's for technical reasons, are happy to proceed with it as an unadopted highway. This is not something that necessarily would be what I would personally like to see. Are you able to comment on your position in respect of it being on completion and before occupation an adopted highway throughout? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So the road is proposed as private in its current form and as it stands. Just as a bit of context for this, the estate road in the High Ash Farm development is also unadopted at this point. Now, the process for adoption is obviously a separate process and is concerns the highway legislation development or your highway arrangements, etc., forward for adoption under section 38. So it is the in due course, but obviously that will be subject to a separate process and one that will be discussed with the highway authority, indeed as is the adjacent High Ash Farm development also.
Just a supplementary question then, would you be happy, were to be approved, if conditions were attached that required the adoption process to be completed before occupation of any single dwelling?
I don't think that would be a policy compliant approach at this stage, because quite simply the adoption process is subject to separate legislation, and obviously the proposal before you is for a private arrangement as it currently stands.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to bring in the Assistant Director responsible for planning, Chris Fredlington. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Darren. Just
Morning.
a quick question. Would a condition framed in the sense prior to occupation, the estate street should be made up to adoptable standard? Would you agree that would be a proper condition?
It is one that we need to seek agreement through from our client. All I would say is that this is the current proposal that is before you based on a private drive arrangement. If it were to be at adoptable standard as initially proposed, then that would be sought at that time. I would need to seek agreement. That's not something that I could agree at this stage in absence of that discussion.
Thank you, Darren. Are there any further questions then? No, no one in the chamber? Right, well, thank you very much indeed for your presentation, Darren. That concludes the presentations. So now members, both remotely and in the chamber, are now perfectly at liberty to ask either further questions or make points or make proposals, etc., etc. So first of all, is there anybody who would like to? First of all, I invite Councillor Derek Adams. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. Derek Adams, Bolsover South. I'm concerned about this development for the virtual meeting site visit. You was raising the land up. Olmley and Tamarisk are lower than the Mansfield Road now on the front. This will put them in a valley, basically, in my opinion. Also, the ones on Fallowfield, they look lower now than what this will be, finished development. Water only runs downhill. It's going to cause problems. A man-made drain needs man-made maintenance. There's no guarantee it'll ever get done. Thank you.
Sarah Jack, to respond to those comments.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. So yes, as I did point out on the virtual site visit, and as we've seen on the site sections that I've shown on the display and the presentation today, there will be some increase in land levels to facilitate the drainage of the site, to facilitate the development of the site. But in terms of, I wouldn't necessarily agree that it will leave Holmley and Tamarisk in a valley as such. The levels increase are probably the most significant along the northern boundary of the application site adjacent to the gardens with Fallowfield. But the development itself will need to make sure that it deals with its own surface water and foul water drainage on site. It doesn't create a problem for any of the properties off site. So in terms of any gradients, engineering and land levels, position of swales and fall in terms of the drainage itself, it shouldn't create any adverse issues for the neighbouring properties. It should essentially wash its own face in terms of the drainage solution. Now, the scheme that's put forward is that it's a scheme for the surface water drainage is to do with soakaways, so that is percolation on site. We've received sufficient information and consulted with the relevant drainage bodies to understand that the drainage will operate at a sufficient capacity and should work as it is proposed to do. So we have to take that on the advice of the experts, the drainage experts in that particular regard. Obviously, we don't know what might happen in the future in terms of it not working, but it will be necessary that any drainage infrastructure is maintained. That might form either part of an adopted drainage system with the local statutory undertakers, or it might be a private drainage solution in terms of the private soakaways that might become part of a management company with a developer in the future. But it will have to prove. We've received satisfactory information to understand that the scheme will work and will drain sufficiently to wash its own face. And any future management issues will have to be raised by the residents as part of their management company if that becomes the case. But I don't think we can be suspicious that it won't work because we've had the confirmation that it will.
Thank you very much indeed. Did you want to come back, Phil?
Thank you, Chair, for your explanation. I'm not convinced because I've seen it operating where I live in Bolsover, where a development has caused flooding. And years later, it's our problem.
Okay. Thank you. Right, the next person who's indicated to speak is Councillor Maxine Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is back to what I briefed on earlier, that we've gone from 15 to 17 dwellings. From what I understand, originally there were more houses, bungalows, 3-bedroom bungalows. The proposed now, which take up more ground. If we went back to 15 dwellings, this would give a larger area for each bungalow, which would take parking for 2 cars on their land and take them off the road, because I know there are concerns for bin lorries, etc. And it would also maybe the plot 5, give plot 5 them the opportunity to turn things around on plot 5, so the garage could be elsewhere and not be a hazard for coming in and out. Thank you.
Thank you for that observation. Comment. Yeah, Sarah wants to respond.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. So yeah, I understand where members are coming from in terms of making reference back to the previous scheme, the extant scheme for 15 dwellings. I just perhaps want to just emphasise the point that we do have to assess each application on its own individual merits. So whilst there was a scheme that was deemed to be acceptable that worked for 15 properties, we've got to look at this planning application on its own individual merits. So we have appraised the separation distances, the parking standards, the relationship to the neighbouring properties in accordance with the local plan and the supplementary planning document as well. And in terms of making those assessments and achieving the distances that are necessary and have been deemed acceptable by those documents, we are at a point where the design is considered to be acceptable. That's the recommendation from officers.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Councillor Duncan McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. It's been really interesting listening to the to's and fro's of comments from the 3 speakers and certainly from some members. But I draw back to the report itself. This was called in by Councillor Alan Bailey on 5 points on page 10 on the report. And I believe that the discussions that's taken place, that has already taken place over the last hour, has covered, I believe, them points in there. In relation to the points made by Mr. Whittaker, Richard Whittaker, and also Michelle Whittaker, I thought I understood what I heard first from Richard was he wasn't absolutely objecting to the application in terms of the site for development, but he got a concern about the certain aspects of it, particularly design, etc. I think overbearing was the word that he described in his presentation. He also mentioned about the fence, and he also mentioned about the footpath, as some other people did. But they've been covered in the report. If members have read the report, they'll understand why the points that's been raised. Certainly, there's explanations for them within that. What happened previously when the 15, it was first mentioned about building 15, as just been mentioned by the previous speaker. Yes, that is a lot of this went back because there was a lot of unease about the development with various aspects of it, and a lot of discussion has taken place. In fact, you, Chair, actually raised on a couple of points. You raised somebody, I can't remember who you mentioned it to, but page 21 and 22 did cover certain aspects. The design through the discussions by the officers has actually changed the whole thing from where it was some months ago to where we are now. And I believe that's a big improvement as to what it was. The mention was mentioned by Michelle regarding the green infrastructure. If you look at the conditions on page 26, 27, colleagues, you will see there is great emphasis in terms of trees, hedges, etc., to cover the part of them conditions. So that the concern on some aspects of what Michelle mentioned is certainly being looked at, and I believe addressed in the report itself. I was I listened to what Nick had said about the electrical socket thing. I think that's a good thing. And I think that the developer, I believe, agreed that possibly we could add that on as an extra condition. I just want clarity on that so as I don't get it wrong. But the application does meet with the approved local plan. We are governed by, and there's a was mentioned, and I'm just going to read. There's part of it here in the landscape visual impact of the proposed development. It continues at the bottom, page 21. The inclusion of the footpath that ties in with the footpath from Fallowfield and connects through to High Ash Farm to the south is considered to be necessary, as this would complete the footpath route between the three sites and contribute to the preeminency and sustainability of these sites. The objections relating to the inclusion of this footpath were noted, but the connectivity of the various individual permissions in this area is seen as a key design component, and it's considered that this should be maintained. The layout has been designed so that all three proposed dwellings alongside that path directly overlook it and should provide a safe route for pedestrians. It's also mentioned the reason for the connectivity because it's all part of that bigger picture of previous developments on that site. There has been a lot of growth development in there. I understand that. But this council also has to meet the amount of development that we have to do in housing. The officer mentioned it earlier on, that we have to take note of that. So I see that I think they've been covered. The comments has been made previously. Derbyshire Wildlife, they've made their comment. The officer mentioned that, and I can go through more. I am, if you will allow, I would at the appropriate stage, Chair, move a resolution.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor McGregor. I will come back to that if I may later. I have other people who wish to speak. Councillor James Watson.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. My question is for the planning manager, Ms. Kay. I wonder if you could help me with this, with the interplay as raised by Mr. Abbott and also Mrs. Whitaker, I think. The interplay of policies SC3 and ITCR 5, which is the open space policies. Can policy SC3 be successfully avoided by having small developments all linked up? So Mr. Abbott mentioned the fact that the development was less than 25 dwellings and therefore didn't come into SC3, which is the health and wellbeing, which is an important characteristic of the development for me. Could you just guide me on that?
I can, thank you. So yeah, the reference is made to the trigger point of 25 dwellings. So from a development management or a development control perspective, if we're dealing with a planning application that's been submitted like this one, we're actually looking at it and judging it on its own individual merits. So we have a scheme here for 17 dwellings. So strictly speaking, it doesn't trigger the requirements of that policy in terms of having to make a contribution specifically on site itself. I guess this comes back to the application and the delivery of the local plan as a whole in terms of where we've got much larger sites or more comprehensive forms of development. That's when we start to look at delivery of green spaces and open spaces as a more sort of comprehensive or a component part of those schemes. But when we get sort of piecemeal or small component parts of applications like we've got with this one, that's the idea of having the other policies and having the ability to collect the commuted sum to make contributions back to existing areas of green space and existing areas of recreational space and such facilities. So you're right, I guess looking at it in the way that you framed it, if we received an awful lot of individual applications that never met that trigger, and we might find us collecting a lot of commuted sums or contributions, which then I guess the council could take a view whether or not they'd got an appropriate location to provide the facilities that all of those component applications have contributed to. So it's a bit of a mix really, but in terms of this particular application, it is policy compliant. They are offering to make the contribution in terms of the commuted sums. And there are local green spaces and play areas and recreational facilities in the immediate local area of Clown where we can spend those commuted sums. So taking all of that into account and putting those all sort of into the balance, really, it seems like the most appropriate solution is reached with this particular application.
But
Councillor
can I just have one follow-up point there, if that's all right, Mr. Councillor?
Yes, sure, please do.
But in Mr. Abbott's evidence and part of the layout for the bungalows was that it was to more attract people with disabilities, and therefore the proximity of a green space to those cohorts of the population would, I think, be quite important.
Well, I think that's a reasonable point to make. I think the Assistant Director with responsibility for planning, Chris Cridlington, wishes to respond to your point. Chris.
Thank you. I very much heard the argument in and outs about green space and their potential contribution to public health or health of individuals. But I think we have to be realistic that on the site of this side, you are not going to achieve a meaningful open space for 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 properties. It is not going to be meaningful. So the policy we provided is, on the side of this side, we make a commuted sum to actually contribute towards something that is meaningful and would serve the wider community. So I don't think this is a planning issue that warrants much further discussion, to be honest. That's obviously up to members.
Thank you, Chris. Right, can we move on? I've got a question from Councillor Natalie Hoy.
Thank you, Chair. I do agree mostly with what Councillor McGregor, has made with comments. But I do think that we do need to take into consideration the comments that have been made by Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker. They're not against the proposal, and they've sent their comments to all members of this committee. It's plot 5, it does appear that it does encroach. We're living in a time, we're in coronavirus, that's there in place of enjoyment. Can we not revisit the roof? Can we not revisit, could it be pitched differently? This seems, to me to be, the main issue for Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker in this application.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to pass over to Sarah to respond.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. So in terms of the application, before it's obviously made its way here to committee before members, we have gone through an awful lot of negotiation and changes with the developer in terms of that particular plot. And I guess the steering point from us is the supplementary planning document and the housing layout design guide, where we do start to set those certain parameters in terms of minimum separation distances, particular measures to mitigate impacts such as overbearing, overshadowing, and those things. And that guidance sets sets in stone the parameters that we've agreed will achieve a certain level of amenity for neighbouring properties. In terms of the relationship to the properties on Fallowfield, I entirely accept that they are at the point of minimum separation. So we achieve 21 metres between the properties to the north and the properties that are proposed on this particular application site. And in terms of plot number 5, that is a little bit, it's a pinch point, but when you're talking about the minimum separation distances of 21 metres, you're talking about facing windows and habitable room windows. And the situation with plot 5 is that actually it's the side elevation of plot 5 that looks towards the north, or is orientated towards the north, adjacent to those properties. So that separation distance can actually start to drop down. And you'll see on the site layout drawing, it's actually a separation distance of 12 metres between the rear elevation of the property on Fallowfield and plot 5. What also has been referenced in terms of overbearing is to do with the height of the property, the changes in land levels, and certainly in terms of our negotiations, we've achieved what we think is the best compromise there in terms of it was originally a 2-storey property. It has been approved as a 2-storey property at that distance on the previous scheme as well. So actually what we feel like we've achieved here for plot 5, with it having the separation distance that it has, no habitable room windows in the side elevation facing the properties on Fallowfield, the removal of permitted development rights, the obscure glazing of the 2 windows that do appear in that property, and the hipped roof of the bungalow house type that is on plot 5. We believe that achieves an appropriate compromise that sits within the parameters of the supplementary planning document and the housing layout design guide. So whilst I appreciate that it's still not acceptable to the neighbouring properties, it's very difficult for us to say that it actually would have a significantly adverse impact upon them now. So as far as officers and our appraisal is concerned, we feel we've reached a point where it is an acceptable relationship.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Is there anybody else in the chamber apart? Before I just double check, is there anybody remotely who wishes to add any further points at all? No, I can see no indication. Right, Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I would, before we take the vote, I would draw members to page 26 on their report, which explains the conclusion on the planning balance. In conclusion, the previous permissions and local plan allocation for residential development weighs heavily in favour of granting planning permission for the current application, because the acceptability of the current site for housing is well established. And I emphasise that. In all other respects, the application is for the most part considered to be acceptable in planning terms for the reasons set out in the above report. And although there are some minor technical issues outstanding, these are very likely resolvable and unlikely, therefore, to weigh negatively in the overall balance of considerations, such that a recommendation to grant permission is proposed. So the recommendation is, I will move the recommendation as outlined on page 26, 27, on 28, and it goes on to 29 and 30, Chair. But I would like confirmation first. The point that Nick mentioned about the electrical thing, I believe that the developer said he would be acceptable to have that as one of the conditions.
Can I just ask Sarah if that's possible?
Yeah, I'd also just make a point as well. There's obviously some additional conditions in the supplementary report as well that need to be added to that recommendation. Yeah, if members felt that they were inclined to want to impose a condition in terms of electric vehicle charging points, that could be something that could be taken.
I would like that to be added in. I think that's important. I think that Nick raised that, and I think that was a good point to raise. But furthermore, on the supplementary one that you put in, it was regarding the recommendation that was to include all conditions in the original report and below are included in precise draft form, with the final wording to be agreed by the planning manager in consultation with the chair and vice chair of the planning committee.
Right, thank you. Does that proposal receive a seconder? Councillor Chris Kane has seconded the proposal. Right. Is there anybody else now wishing to speak at all for or against the proposal before we move, please, to a vote? Yes, Donna, you have no doubt an important issue to raise. Donna.
Chair, yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Chris Fridlington was discussing a condition about the road being an adoptable standard. I'm not sure whether that's covered in the supplementary report or any of the conditions, if that's something that needs to be added or not.
Sarah?
No, if the adoptable standard isn't covered in the supplementary report, that would be something that members would have to take a view on if they felt they wanted the driveway. As far as the officer consideration, we believe it's an acceptable highway layout and can operate safely in terms of highway safety and parking as a private drive, but members might be minded to require that it is built to an adoptable standard. I don't think we can actually go as far as insisting it is put forward or adopted by the local highways authority, but members to consider.
If I may, thank you, Sarah. My own view is that as members, subject to advice clearly from Sarah and from Chris, I think we should certainly be stating that we wish it to be raised to an adoptable standard, because ultimately we don't want people moving in onto that estate and 10 years down the line suddenly find themselves on a road that's basically deteriorated and our vehicles can't get on to remove their waste, and they're having to push their wheelie bins to the access road for the neighbouring development. And I think we should be quite strong about requiring it to be to an adoptable standard. It may not already be adopted, but we want it delivered to an adoptable standard before, in my opinion, the first house is occupied. Chris, I believe you have some advice.
I'm not sure if Councillor Dixon will raise the example of Ash Close. Was that what you're going to raise? Yeah, so Councillor Dixon will be aware of the need to put this sort of condition on to preclude further problems. Nicola's been in touch with me since we were talking to say that Darren, the agent, was happy to accept the condition that the road shall be made up to adoptable standards prior to occupation. So I would personally recommend that during the discussion.
As a condition. Okay, thank you. So with that added on, are you now happy?
Yes, I would accept that. We've got enough private ones where we've experienced them, Tom. No, I'd certainly welcome that. Thank you. And I would add that.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to now move, if I may, to a vote. And I'm quite happy to do this if you are happy to do this. Oh, sorry, just a second. Councillor Maxine Dixon.
Sorry, I'm not sure if this is the correct time to ask it, but I can't see anywhere, maybe I've overlooked it, where is the parking for 2 cars on the front of each property so that we don't get parking on the roads?
Just as a point of interest, I can cite many properties in the community in which I live, Whitwell, that have adequate parking for 3 and 4 cars that have cars parked in front of them and the drive's empty. So I'll ask the question of Sarah, is there adequate parking for 2 cars on each property? But it's not in our power, it's not in anybody's power from what I can work out to actually ensure that ever actually happens. However, I will ask Sarah to clarify.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Yes, so in terms of the site layout drawing, each of the properties have either a combination of private driveways and garage spaces as well. So each of the dwellings actually do have sufficient parking to meet the council's adopted parking standards. So that actually might mean that there is at least 2 spaces or possibly even 3 spaces available as well.
Okay, so we'll now move, if we may please, to a vote. So first of all, I'm going to take a vote, if I may, with the members who've joined us remotely. So will all members, you've heard the motion that's moved. All those in favour of the motion, which is the recommendation in your documents plus the extra conditions, please show on those remotely. All those in favour?
That's 2 clearly indicating 4.
Thank you. All those against voting remotely? Thank you. Are there any
5, Chair.
abstentions of those joining us remotely? Any abstentions? No, right. So in
1 abstention, Chair.
Sorry, Nick, what was that?
1 abstention shown, Chair.
Thank
So
you.
remotely, that's 2 for, 5 against, 1 abstention.
Thank you. Right, in the chamber, all those in favour, please indicate. That's 6. Any against? That's 3. And are there any abstentions? There are no abstentions. So there was 1 abstention online. That's right. Okay. So the vote is 8 for, 8 against, and 1 abstention. I'm now, I believe, I'll be corrected. I'll take advice from
Yes,
the
Chair, you
legal
have a
officer.
you have a casting vote.
I may use my casting vote, in which case I will use my casting vote and vote in favour of the recommendation. And so the planning application has been granted, with all the conditions attached. I will now move on, if I may, to item 6, which is appeal decisions January 2020 to June 2020. And I'll now invite the planning manager, Sarah, to present her report. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. There is a very brief slide on the PowerPoint presentation, Nikki, if you're able to get it back up. But to be honest, it's probably only a summary of what I'm going to say anyway. So I'll proceed, and if you can jump to the last slide for members to see on the screen when you're ready, I'll just proceed and just give a quick brief update. So this is an update report on the appeal decisions that have been made by the Planning Inspectorate for the period from January 2020 to June 2020. It's an update report that is provided to members on the basis that we have key performance indicators, and we are monitored nationally on our performance and the decisions that are taken, in particular with reference to any overturned appeal decisions against either officers or planning committee's final decisions. So there are 5 appeal decision summaries that have been appended to this particular update report. That is in relation to us receiving 4 that relate to non-major development and 1 that is a validation dispute. And in terms of those 5 appeal decisions that we received, 2 of those appeal decisions have been allowed, and 2 of those appeal decisions have been dismissed. And as I've mentioned, the 5th decision is actually a decision about the validation of a planning application, in which the inspector actually agreed with the council's decision that the application was not a valid planning application. So in terms of the remaining 4 appeals, as I've said, they're non-major appeals. 2 of them, so in terms of those appeals, I'll just tell again, just for reference, 1 relates to the Laurels at Ruthrin Avenue, 1 relates to the McDonald's at Tally's End, 1 relates to 37 Low Common at Balborough, and the other one is at the Dales, number 21 Worksop Road. 2 of those appeals which were dismissed, they were relating to developments that were proposed within the Greenbelt. And essentially, just as a quick summary, the inspector has agreed that the view that the council took in terms of the position of the Greenbelt policy position and the development, the inappropriateness of both of those development proposals in the Greenbelt were agreed by the inspector, and both those appeals were dismissed. Of the 2 appeals that were allowed, the first one relates to a proposal by McDonald's, which is located at Tally's End at Balborough, and that was to extend their opening hours by 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening. They were currently conditioned to operate from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. So that was a proposal to extend their hours to 5 a.m. and then through to until midnight. We were concerned that an agreement to those increased opening hours would generate an increase in noise and disturbance to nearby residents. However, the determining inspector on that particular appeal disagreed with the council's view, and they felt that the extended opening hours wouldn't lead to a significantly adverse impact on those neighbouring properties. And therefore they agreed to extend the opening hours and to change that condition to allow McDonald's to operate as they were seeking. In terms of our reflection on that particular appeal decision, that was a judgment call by the inspector. I think I'm not particularly, I don't feel like there's anything to report in terms of policy issues in terms of the decision we took. It was just a judgment call by the inspector on that particular instance. The second appeal relates to a dispute whether a building that was associated with a particular application that we'd received was in an agricultural use at a pre-prescribed date that would allow the applicant to make an application for prior approval for a particular type of development proposal. Essentially on this one, we took a view that they hadn't met that requirement, that the building was in an agricultural use at a particular date, but the inspector simply took a different view, and they felt that the qualifying criteria had been met. So they were able to actually go ahead and therefore deem that the application could be considered under those under the rights, and that's actually under the general permitted development order. So again, it was just a different inspector taking a different view. This particular case and the ability to convert agricultural buildings into alternative uses through this particular route and this fast-tracked application process, there's an awful lot of case law about that concludes one way and another. So whilst we'd found cases that we felt supported our judgment on this one, the inspector took a different view simply. So again, no need to sort of revisit our policies in this particular case because it was another judgment call by the inspector. So in terms of the performance and the impact that those appeal decisions have on our officer performance, we've reported quarter 4 for 2019-2020 and quarter 1 for 2020-2021. We're still in a position where we've only had 2 out of 56 appeals overturned, so that's 3.6%, whereas the national trigger for the government to intervene if there's any particular concern about our performance is 10%. So we're well within our performance for that particular case. And in terms of, sorry, that relates to majors. In terms of non-majors, we've still only got 2 appeals allowed out of 343 decisions that we've taken over the last 2 years. So that equates to a 0.3% overturn in terms of our decision making. So again, the national trigger is 10, so we're well within our performance. So nothing in terms of raising concerns for members about the appeals or those 2 that were particularly allowed. So
Thank you very much indeed for your report, Sarah. Any members in the chamber have any questions on the report? Any members joining us remotely have any questions on the report? Right, and no, in which case I'll move the recommendation on page 39. There's no recommendation. Basically, it's just that we note the report, I think. Okay, so we're all happy to note the report. Been seconded. Just quick show of hands. All those in favour of noting the report? I think that's Graham, are you voting? Yes, he is voting. Right, thank you. Alan, you vote noting the report? Yes, he is. Okay, I just couldn't see his hand. All in the chamber noting the report? Yep, I think that's unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is agenda item 7, which is revision to the name and terms of reference to the local plan steering group. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Chris McKinney, who is the Assistant Director of Development Planning, to present the report. Over to you, Chris McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. So the report before you today refers to the Council's local plan steering group and a recent review of its purpose and its name in light of the adoption of the local plan for Bolsover District in March. This review understandably included the views of the group's members, and their views were sought on whether members wanted to stay involved as we implement the local plan. And if so, should the terms of reference be updated to reflect the work of the planning policy team on delivering improvement projects for the benefits of the district and our communities. The improvement project is summarised on page 41 of the agenda, and some members of the committee will already be aware of the current town centre and tree planting projects that are ongoing. In response to that question, the members of the steering group said yes, they wish to stay involved, and we then looked at taking forward the projects, setting those out on page, again, 41. In relation, there's the spectre of the white paper, the planning white paper, and so members of the committee who've attended the briefing on the white paper a fortnight ago will recall the short timescales for complying with the proposed plan making work. The threats of intervention for those councils that don't comply, and thus the intensive work of the council on the planning policy team in particular in delivering a new plan again. So as a result, the terms of reference endorsed by members of the steering group on the 2nd of September retain a number of the plan making functions So to allow the group to then, if the white paper comes into law, to direct the planning policy team to stop work on the improvement projects and return to plan making work. The endorsed terms of reference are contained in Appendix 2 of the report on pages 45 and 46, and the recommendation is set out on page 42. So that's the end of my report, Chair. So thank you, and I can accept any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Do any members have any questions on the proposal in terms of the new terms of reference and the new name, which is the local plan implementation group? Nothing, nobody online, nobody virtually, anybody in the chamber? Yes, Councillor Natalie Oy. Can't hear.
It's not a comment, Chair, it's just an observation. We appear to have lost a councillor off the screen. I think it's James Watson we're missing. I just thought I'd just point that out.
Chair, for your information,
Absolutely.
Councillor Watson has left the meeting.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Watson has left the meeting.
Thank you.
He clearly wasn't inspired by local plan implementation group. Okay, thank you. Right.
I wouldn't want him to miss, the
Thank you.
information on the
Thank you,
local plan, that's
Councillor
all.
Thank you. Right. Okay. Are there any questions? No. Well, there is a recommendation on page
42. Chair, I will move the recommendation as 6.1.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Kane. I'm sorry, you got in first. Right. All those in favour, please indicate. That includes those online. Right. All those in chamber, please indicate. That's unanimous in the chamber. Are there anybody against voting online? Any abstentions? Well, one abstention. Thank you. That's carried. Right, and that concludes the business of today's meeting. So the live streaming can now cease. Can I thank everybody for their contributions and their attendance this morning, and wish you all a very happy rest of the day, wherever you may be.